A tea, my wedding, my future mother-in-law secretly poured something into my glass. Switched our drinks without her noticing. During her toast, she smiled. "You'll never forget today." I smiled back. The first thing I noticed was her hand, steady, deliberate, tilting a small amber vial over the rim of my champagne glass. I was 20 feet away, crossing the ballroom to check the table settings, when I caught it in the decorative mirror on the far wall. My future mother-in-law, Vivian Callaway, stood at the head table with her back to the room, her left hand fussing with the centerpiece orchids, while her right hand poured. She tucked the vial into her clutch, smoothed the tablecloth, and walked out through the main doors without looking back. She never saw me standing at the side entrance. I waited 5 seconds. Then I walked to the table, picked up both champagne flutes as if adjusting the place cards, and switched them. Her glass in my spot, my glass, and hers. I set them down and wiped my hands on the linen napkin. My hands were steady. I'm a forensic accountant. I trace 7-figure fraud for a living. Switching 2 glasses was the easiest thing I did all week. But the sedative was the least of what Vivian Callaway was hiding. What I'd found in her company books made that little amber vial look like a party favor. And in about 2 hours, every guest in this room was going to understand exactly who she really was. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. I'm Morgan Porter, 32, forensic accountant, from a peach farm in Ridge, South Carolina. This is the story of how my mother-in-law tried to ruin my wedding day, and how I let her ruin her own instead. If you've ever dealt with a toxic in-law who hid behind the word family to control everything around them, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I grew up on a 40-acre peach orchard outside Ridge Spring. My father, Dale Porter, taught me 2 things before a tractor accident took him when I was 19. How to spot a bruised peach by touch alone, and how to read a person the same way by what's soft underneath the surface. After he died, my mother Janine sold the orchard, moved into a single wide near Batesburg, and told me to get my degree, or she'd haunt me from beyond the grave. Even though she was still alive. I put myself through the University of South Carolina accounting, got my CPA at 26, landed at Harrove & Associates in Greenville, specializing in fraud examination, tracing money that people tried very hard to make invisible. That's where numbers became my language. I met Ethan Callaway at a library fundraiser in Greer, the kind of small-town event where you eat cheese cubes off paper plates and write checks you can barely afford. He was tall, quiet, sunburned from working construction sites. He didn't mention his family's company until our 3rd date. He didn't mention the money until our 5th. The first time I drove out to the Callaway estate, I noticed things. The wrought iron gate needed repainting. One of the garage doors hung crooked on its track. The front porch boards had that slight give that means moisture underneath. For a family that owned the biggest construction outfit in Greer, the house looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Vivian Callaway opened the front door in a cream silk blouse and pearl earrings. Her smile was immediate and practiced, the kind that starts at the mouth and never quite reaches the eyes. She looked at my shoes first, then my ring finger, then my face. "Ethan didn't mention you were in accounting," she said. And the way she said accounting made it sound like a condition. The first family dinner was at the estate. Vivian sat at the head of the table, which told me everything. Her brother, Bryce Howren, sat to her right, 52, ruddy-faced, a real estate broker who dressed like he closed deals he didn't actually close. He had one of those handshakes that lasted too long and squeezed too hard, as if firmness could substitute for substance. Vivian directed the seating. She directed the conversation. She directed the wine selection, and the moment dessert arrived, and when it was appropriate to speak about Robert, her late husband, who died of a heart attack 5 years ago. Everything in that house ran on her schedule, and nobody seemed to notice because she wrapped the control in linen napkins and good china. Bryce leaned across the table toward me during the main course. "So Morgan, what's a girl from a peach farm doing auditing the big leagues?" The table got quiet. Not silent. Quiet. The kind of quiet where forks slow down. Fraud doesn't care where you're from. I said, it only cares if you're paying attention. Ethan's younger sister, Paige, 24, senior at Clemson, warm in the way people are before life teaches them not to be, changed the subject by asking me about a Netflix documentary on financial crimes. She was genuinely curious. I liked her immediately, but I watched Vivian and Bryce trade a glance when I used the phrase forensic accounting. It was fast, practiced, the kind of look two people share when they've been keeping the same secret for a long time. On the drive home, I told Ethan his uncle asked a lot of questions about my job. He laughed. That's just Uncle Bryce. He's nosy. I didn't laugh back. Ethan proposed in the old peach orchard, the one my parents used to own. The new owners had let half the trees go wild, but the other half still bloomed in neat rows, and in April the blossoms made the air smell like something you wanted to keep. He got down on one knee between two gnarled trunks, and I said yes before he finished the question. My mother cried on the phone. She said Dale would have been proud. She said it twice because she meant it twice. Vivian's response came 40 seconds into the call, and I know because Ethan had her on speaker. Silence then. Well, welcome to the family, I suppose. Ethan mouthed, sorry at me. I shrugged. Some people struggle with joy that isn't theirs. But later that night, I walked past the bedroom door while Ethan was talking to her privately. I heard Vivian through the phone, sharp and low. She's going to want access to the trust, Ethan. That's what people like her do. Ethan said, Mom, she makes her own money. And Vivian said, for now. I stood in the hallway for a long moment after the call ended. People like her. I grew up picking peaches in the dark before school because the packing house opened at 6. I paid my own tuition with tip money from waitressing and a grant I applied for 3 times before they said yes. People like me aren't after your trust fund, Vivian. We don't even know what a trust fund looks like until someone hands us the paperwork. But the word trust stuck. She'd said it like it was something she needed to guard, not share. Guard. Standard practice before a marriage. You sit down and lay out the finances. I've done this for clients. Walked couples through assets, debts, insurance, retirement. When I asked Ethan about the family trust, he scratched the back of his neck the way he does when a question makes him uncomfortable. Dad set it up before he passed. Mom manages it. I think I get my share when she decides the time is right. No written terms, no distribution schedule, just his mother's judgment. That bothered me, but I kept it professional. I pulled up the South Carolina Secretary of State's business filings on my laptop. Callaway Construction was there. Registered agent, Vivian Callaway. But right below it, another LLC caught my eye. Piedmont Property Solutions. Same registered address as Callaway Construction. Registered agent Bryce Howren. I looked at the formation date, 3 months after Robert Callaway died. Does your mom have any side business with your uncle? I asked. Ethan frowned. Not that I know of. Why? I showed him the screen. He shrugged. Bryce does real estate. Maybe it's just his thing. Maybe? But I've spent 6 years tracking shell companies, and I know what they look like. They look exactly like Piedmont Property Solutions. Minimal filings, no public revenue, no employees, registered at a convenience address. I wanted to ask Vivian directly. Ethan asked me to wait. Don't make waves before the wedding, Morgan. I didn't argue, but that night I screenshotted every filing page, every officer listing, every registered address, saved them to a folder on my laptop labeled Callaway Premarital. If this was nothing, the folder would stay empty. If it wasn't nothing, I'd already started. Vivian announced she would handle the entire wedding. Not offered. Announced. That's what the Callaway family does, she said, standing in her kitchen with a planning binder she'd apparently started before the engagement ring was even warm. She chose the venue, the Callaway Estate Ballroom, naturally. She chose the caterer, the florist, the string quartet. She chose the champagne brand, and the specific glacier for the head. It's tradition, she said. Tradition in Vivian's vocabulary meant control with a prettier name. I let most of it go. I wasn't marrying the venue. But when the caterer's invoice arrived, CCED to me by mistake, I noticed it was billed to Callaway Construction, not to Vivian's personal account. A $12,000 wedding reception, charged to a business entity. Commingling of personal and business expenses. In my profession, that's the first thread you pull. I mentioned it carefully during a planning meeting. I'd like the wedding expenses billed separately from the company, just cleaner for everyone's taxes. Vivian's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. "Are you auditing my family already?" Paige, sitting on the kitchen stool with her laptop, looked up. "Mom, she's just asking." Vivian turned to Paige without raising her voice, which was worse than raising it. "Don't start." The room went cold. I smiled. "Just a suggestion," I said, and moved on to seating charts. But I filed that reaction the way I file every reaction that doesn't match the question. An honest person says sure, makes the change, forgets about it. A person hiding something turns a simple billing request into an accusation. Vivian was hiding something, and she just told me exactly where to look. The call started 2 weeks after the billing conversation. I didn't hear them directly. I pieced them together from the chill that crept into every Callaway interaction. Vivian had been reaching out to cousins, friends of the family, the construction company's office manager, even the church deacon. The message was always the same, wrapped in different words. "Morgan is asking questions about our finances. Isn't that strange for someone who hasn't even married in yet?" Bryce did his part at the next family gathering. "Loud enough for the table. I hear you've been Googling the family business, Morgan. That's a bit forward for someone who hasn't said I do yet." Paige stopped texting me about Clemson football. She still smiled when we saw each other, but the warmth had a gap in it now, like a tooth gone missing. Ethan was frustrated at his mother, not at me. But he still believed in Vivian's good intentions, the way children believe in the houses they grew up in. He thought this was just a difficult adjustment period. I knew it was a perimeter defense. I called Rachel Dunn from the parking lot of a Publix on a Wednesday afternoon. Rachel was my best friend from USC, now a civil attorney at a small firm in Greenville. She was the kind of lawyer who wore sneakers to depositions, and won anyway. "I think my future mother-in-law is hiding something in the company books," I told her. "And I think she knows I can see it." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Then you need documentation, Morgan. Not suspicion, not instinct. Documentation, the kind a judge can hold." I sat in my car and watched shoppers push their carts through the lot. "I know," I said. "That's what I'm building." I spent 3 evenings that week on the Greenville County Assessor's website, cross-referencing property records with what I'd found in the Secretary of State filings. The pattern was clean. Too clean, actually. Which is how amateurs think they're being careful. Callaway Construction owned parcels of undeveloped land around Greer and Taylor. Over the past 3 years, 3 of those parcels had been sold to Piedmont Property Solutions, Bryce's shell company. Each sale was priced 40 to 60% above the county's assessed market value. Parcel on Old Buncombe Road, assessed at $92,000, sold to Piedmont for $148. Lot off Whitehorse Road, assessed at $65, sold for $105. Halfaker on Gilder Creek, assessed at $81, sold for $130. Piedmont then resold each parcel to third-party developers at or near market value. The difference vanished into Piedmont's accounts, which meant into Bryce's pocket, and from the billing patterns I'd seen at Callaway Construction, likely back to Vivian through what I suspected were consulting fees or management reimbursements. Total inflated value across 3 transactions, roughly $500,000. $500,000 funneled through a shell company using a dead man's construction firm as the source. I sat back in my desk chair and stared at the numbers on my screen. I've worked fraud cases involving healthcare kickbacks, payroll schemes, insurance cons, but this was the first time the defendant was going to be my mother-in-law. I needed the original trust document to prove the source of the money. Without it, Vivian could claim these were legitimate business decisions. With it, the entire chain of custody collapsed. Rachel had asked where Robert might have kept his papers. The answer was sitting in our garage, in boxes Ethan hadn't opened in 5 years. The photographer called on a Tuesday. Her voice had the tight politeness of someone delivering bad news they didn't cause. "I'm so sorry, Morgan. I received a call from Mrs. Callaway. She said the family has their own photographer and my services wouldn't be needed. She canceled the contract." I thanked her, hung up, stood in my kitchen, and breathed. Vivian hadn't just overridden my choice. She'd reached into the one part of the wedding I'd paid for myself, and ripped it out. This wasn't about photography, this was a message. I control the frame. Everything inside it is mine, including you. I found a new photographer that afternoon, a young woman named Clara, who ran a one-person studio in Simpsonville, well outside Vivian's social orbit. I paid the deposit from my own checking account, sent Clara the venue details, and didn't mention it to Vivian. When Ethan heard what happened, something shifted in him. He called his mother from our kitchen, standing by the sink with one hand braced on the counter. "You don't get to fire Morgan's photographer, Mom." I could hear Vivian's voice through the phone, measured and wounded. "I was trying to help Ethan. The family photographer knows our property. I was thinking of her." Ethan said, "You were thinking of yourself. Stop." He hung up before she could respond. He looked at me across the kitchen with an expression I hadn't seen before. The expression of a man realizing his mother might not be who he thought she was. "She's never done anything like this," he said. I wanted to tell him she'd done things exactly like this. I just hadn't been around to see them, but I held that thought. The timing wasn't right. Not yet. Vivian hosted the bridal shower at the estate on a Saturday afternoon. She invited 34 women. My mother was not among them. Neither was Rachel. "I must have lost the addresses," Vivian said when I asked, touching her collarbone like the oversight pained her. "These things happen with big guest lists." She introduced me to her friends as if I were a new hire at orientation. "This is Morgan, Ethan's fiancée. She's an accountant. She's very precise, light laughter, the kind that follows permission rather than humor." I smiled, made small talk, complimented the shrimp, played the part of the grateful almost daughter-in-law because that's what Vivian expected, and I've learned that the best way to study someone is to let them believe they're running the show. Bryce appeared halfway through, which was unusual. Men don't typically attend bridal showers, but nothing about the Callaway family followed typical patterns. He found me near the dessert table and leaned in close enough that I could smell the bourbon on his breath. "A little advice, sweetheart. This family doesn't air its laundry. You dig? You'll find yourself standing alone." I looked at him. "Is that a threat, Bryce?" He straightened up and adjusted his blazer the way men do when they want to look larger. "It's a family tradition. We protect each other." "I don't scare easy, Bryce. I picked up a pet at 4 from the silver tray. Numbers have been keeping me company since I was 19. I took a bite and walked away. He stayed by the dessert table and I felt his eyes follow me across the room. Vivian and Bryce were coordinating. That was clear now. What wasn't clear was how far they'd go. I was about to find out. Rachel and I met at a cafe on Augusta Street in Greenville, the kind with exposed brick and espresso machines that cost more than my first car. I spread the printouts across the table: Secretary of State filings, property assessor records, transaction dates, price comparisons. The Piedmont Property Solutions LLC formation. Rachel read with her attorney face. Flat, thorough, no reaction until she'd absorbed everything. Then she set the papers down and looked at me. "This is solid circumstantial evidence. The inflated sale prices, the shell company, the timing after Robert's death. It paints a picture. But to prove trust fraud, you need the trust document itself. Without it, Vivian can claim these were legitimate business transactions between related entities. I know you could file with probate court to compel disclosure of the trust instrument. South Carolina code allows interested parties to petition." She paused. "But that takes 60 to 90 days. And the moment Vivian gets served, she'll know exactly what you're doing." I stirred my coffee. "The wedding is in 6 weeks. "Exactly." Rachel leaned back. "So, you need the original document some other way. Where would Robert have kept his papers? Ethan has boxes of his dad's things. They've been in our garage since the funeral. He's never opened them." Rachel looked at me steadily. "Then that's your next step. Not the county assessor's office, not a court filing, a box in your own garage." I drove home that evening on back roads through Traveler's Rest, past horse farms and Baptist churches with gravel parking lots. Somewhere in a dusty box, between old photographs and work boots, and letters from a dead man to his children, was the answer to a question I hadn't wanted to ask. But I was going to ask it anyway. My boss called me on a Thursday morning. Dan Harov, founder of Harov and Associates, 61. Bow ties and bifocals. The kind of man who speaks in complete paragraphs. "Morgan, I received a call yesterday from a Mrs. Vivian Callaway. She wants to engage our firm for an independent review of her construction company's financial statements, standard audit scope." He paused. "She specifically mentioned that her future daughter-in-law works here. Is there a conflict I should know about? I stared at the wall above my desk, where I kept a framed copy of my CPA certificate. Vivian had called my firm. She was trying to create a conflict of interest. If Harov took Callaway Construction as a client, I would be barred from any personal investigation involving the company's finances, professional ethics rules. She knew that there's a potential conflict, Dan. She's my fiancé's mother, and I have reason to believe there may be irregularities in the company's accounts. I can't elaborate further right now. Dan was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll decline the engagement. Conflict is conflict. I thanked him and hung up. Then, I sat very still in my office chair for a long time. Vivian knew. She knew I was looking, and she'd tried to cut my legs out from under me using the rules of my own profession. That was sophisticated. That was not the move of a woman who'd accidentally commingled a wedding invoice. That was strategy, which meant I was running out of time. If Vivian was willing to call my employer, she was willing to do more. The trust document couldn't wait for a court petition. It couldn't wait for the right moment. It needed to happen this week. The boxes in the garage had waited 5 years. They couldn't wait another day. I asked Ethan that evening if we could go through his father's boxes. I framed it as premarital financial planning, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did need to understand the family's financial picture before we combined our lives. But the real reason sat behind my ribs like a stone. Ethan said yes, but his voice caught. I haven't opened those since the funeral, Morgan. 5 years. We carried them from the garage into the living room. 4 banker's boxes, brown cardboard, each one labeled in Robert's blocky handwriting. Office, personal, insurance, family. We started with office, tax returns, W-2s, business cards from suppliers, a hard hat safety certification from 2014. The paper smelled like dust and aftershave, and Ethan held each document carefully, as if his father's fingerprints might still be warm. In personal, we found photographs. Robert at a construction site, squinting into the sun, one hand on a steel beam. Robert and Vivian at what looked like a Christmas party, her hand on his arm, both of them younger and less armored. Robert with Ethan at his high school graduation, a letter tucked into the frame. Build something real, son. Ethan read the letter twice. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and didn't apologize for it, which made me love him more. I put my hand on his shoulder and held it there. I knew what it was to lose a father and find pieces of him in boxes years later. The handwriting that doesn't change, the objects that still carry weight. In the family box beneath Paige's birth certificate and Ethan's baptism record, I found a sealed envelope. Robert's handwriting on the front. It said, "For my children, when the time comes." I held the envelope up to the lamp. Thick paper inside, multiple pages. I looked at Ethan. He nodded. I opened it carefully, sliding my thumb under the flap so the seal tore clean. Inside a copy of the Robert Callaway Family Trust Agreement, dated 11 years ago, notarized in Greenville County. Stapled to the front, a handwritten letter on lined paper. The trust language was clear. I'd read hundreds of these documents professionally, and this one was straightforward. Robert had established a trust with an initial principal of $650,000. The equity from a land sale he'd made before the company expanded. Beneficiaries: Ethan Robert Callaway and Paige Marie Callaway in equal shares. Distribution trigger: each beneficiary receives their respective share upon reaching the age of 30. Trustee Vivian Callaway, with fiduciary duty to preserve and distribute the principal according to the stated terms. Ethan was 33. He'd been eligible for 3 years. He'd received nothing. I read the letter next. Robert's handwriting was careful, deliberate, the writing of a man who built things with his hands and chose his words the same way. It said, "Vivian, I trust you with this because I trust you with our children. If I'm not here, please give them what I set aside. It's not much, but it's theirs. They'll know what to do with it." Robert. I set the letter on the coffee table. The math was already running in my head. Trust principal: 650,000 property transactions, siphoned through Piedmont, roughly 540,000, remaining in trust, maybe 110,000, maybe less. I looked at Ethan. His father's letter was in his hands. Your dad left you money. I said your mom spent it. Most people would have stopped there, called a lawyer, filed the papers, let the courts sort it out over the next 6 months. And maybe I should have. But Vivian wasn't just stealing numbers on a spreadsheet. She was stealing from the man Ethan still cried about in our garage on a Tuesday night. If you've ever watched someone you love get robbed of what their parent left them, stay with me. This part matters. The next morning, I drove to First National on Main Street and rented a safe deposit box. I placed the original trust document and Robert's letter inside, kept the key on my keychain next to my car fob. Then I made 3 photocopies at the FedEx office on Pleasantburg Drive. One for Rachel, one for the file, one for the moment I hadn't planned yet, but knew was coming. Rachel examined the trust document that afternoon in her office. She read it twice, cross-referenced the distribution clause with the South Carolina trust code pulled up on her monitor, and set it down. This is actionable. Vivian breached her fiduciary duty as trustee. She was obligated to distribute Ethan's share when he turned 30. She didn't, and the property transactions, through Piedmont. That's self-D'ing through a related party. Can we prove the money came from the trust? With this document plus the public property records plus the company billing patterns, yes, a forensic accountant could trace the chain. She looked at me, which is exactly what you are. I nodded. Rachel connected me with James Ostrander, a senior forensic accountant she'd worked with on insurance fraud cases. James was retired, methodical, the kind of man who brought his own calculator to restaurants. He reviewed my analysis in 2 days. His conclusion was professional and devastating. Trust funds had been used as operating capital for Callaway Construction, then laundered through inflated property sales to Piedmont Property Solutions. From Piedmont, the proceeds split. Bryce retained a broker's commission on each transaction, and the remainder flowed back to Vivian through quarterly consulting invoices from Piedmont to Callaway Construction. Total misappropriated, $541,800. James looked at me over his reading glasses. This isn't just civil liability, Morgan. The amounts and the pattern could meet the threshold for criminal fraud under South Carolina law. 2 weeks before the wedding, Vivian invited me for tea. Just the 2 of us at the estate in the sunroom, where Robert's hunting trophies still hung on the walls and the afternoon light came through in long golden bars. She poured Earl Grey from a porcelain pot and set a cup in front of me, with the handle turned precisely to the right. Then she sat across from me and stopped pretending. I know you've been looking into the family finances, Morgan. Her voice was calm, modulated, the voice of a woman who'd practiced this conversation in her bathroom mirror. I don't know what you think you found, but let me be clear. If you try to cause problems, there will be no wedding. I'll make sure Ethan sees you for what you are. She paused. A gold digger from a trailer park. The sunroom was quiet except for the tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway. I picked up the teacup, took a sip, set it down. My mother lives in that trailer park, Vivian. She's the hardest working person I've ever known. I held Vivian's gaze, and she taught me something your accountant apparently didn't. Every dollar has an owner, Vivian. Something moved behind Vivian's eyes. Not anger exactly, but the controlled panic of a woman who just heard the floor creak beneath her feet. You don't know what you're playing with, she said. I'm not playing. I stood up. Thank you for the tea. I walked to my car, backed down the driveway, and checked my rearview mirror. Through the sunroom window, I could see Vivian already on her phone. Within 30 seconds, she was pacing. I didn't need to hear the call to know who she was talking to. Bryce was about to have a very bad afternoon. 10 days before the wedding, I met with the venue coordinator at the Callaway estate to finalize the reception layout. Her name was Deborah. Efficient, clipboard-wielding, the kind of woman who alphabetizes spice racks for fun. I asked her about the security cameras. We have 2 in the ballroom, Deborah said, pointing at a diagram. One covering the main entrance, one angled toward the bar area and head table. They record to a local DVR in the utility closet. Can you make sure the recordings are preserved for the night of the event? Both cameras full coverage. Deborah made a note. Of course. Any particular reason? Insurance purposes, I said, which was technically true. I was insuring myself against whatever Vivian was planning. Meanwhile, Rachel and I finalized the forensic report. 47 pages. Every inflated property transaction documented. The trust agreement terms, the distribution timeline showing Ethan's missed payout, the shell company structure, the consulting fee pipeline from Piedmont back to Vivian. James Arander signed off as the reviewing forensic accountant. His professional opinion was attached as an appendix. Rachel drafted a formal demand letter addressed to Vivian Callaway as trustee, citing breach of fiduciary duty, demanding a full accounting and return of misappropriated funds within 30 days, but we wouldn't send it before the wedding. The plan was clean. Saturday. The wedding. Monday morning, Rachel sends the demand letter by certified mail. Simultaneously, she sends a copy of the forensic report to Harold Fenn, a retired financial advisor who'd been Robert's trusted consultant, and whose name appeared in the trust document as an advisory contact. Harold would have standing to petition the probate court for trustee replacement. Vivian wouldn't know until Monday. By then, the paperwork would already be moving. Here's the thing about being a forensic accountant marrying into a construction family. You learn that some foundations look solid from the street, but they're hollow underneath. I knew what was underneath the Callaway Foundation. Now, every dollar, every fake sale, every consulting invoice that led nowhere. Vivian thought the biggest risk on her wedding day was a champagne glass. She had no idea. I was the risk, and I was standing right next to her son. 1 week before the wedding, a Thursday night, I sat Ethan down at our kitchen table with a folder. Not the full 47-page report, but a summary, 8 pages clean. The way I'd present findings to a client before recommending next steps. I let him read. He went through it slowly, turning each page with the deliberation of a man who builds things and understands that structures have load limits. When he finished, he set the folder down and stared at the wall behind me. How much? He said about $540,000 out of $650. My dad's money. His voice was flat. The money he saved from that land sale. The money he told me about when I was 16. He said he'd set something aside for me and Paige, for when we were ready. I didn't feel the silence. Some silences need to stay whole. What do we do? He asked. Rachel has a demand letter ready. It goes out Monday after the wedding. Harold Fenn, your dad's old financial advisor, gets the full report the same day. He can petition the court to replace your mom as trustee. Ethan looked at his hands. Construction hands. His father's hands. We don't have to do anything right now, I said. The wedding can go ahead if you want, or we can postpone. I'm with you either way. He shook his head. We're getting married Saturday, and then we're fixing this together. I reached across the table and held his hand. Then he said something else. There's something you should know. Mom's been strange about the champagne. She insisted on choosing the brand, the glasses, the arrangement on the head. Said it was tradition. I filed that word again. Tradition. Every time Vivian said it, she meant something she didn't want examined. The rehearsal dinner was Friday night at the estate. 40 guests packed into the dining room. Both families, close friends, a few Callaway construction foremen who'd known Robert. Vivian presided from the head of the table in a navy dress and her pearl earrings, the same ones she'd worn the first time I met her. She gave a speech. It was objectively beautiful. She talked about Robert, how he built the company with his bare hands, how he loved his children, how the Callaway legacy meant continuing what he started. Her voice cracked at the right moments. Her eyes glistened at the right moments. Every beat was calibrated. The room applauded. I watched from the far end of the table and thought, she's performing a woman who loved her husband while spending the money he left his children, and she's good at it. Bryce sat next to me, which I suspected was deliberate. He leaned over during dessert, his breath carrying bourbon again. Last chance to reconsider bookkeeper. I turned my head just enough to see his profile. I don't reconsider Bryce. I reconcile. He didn't get the accounting joke. I didn't explain it. Paige found me near the coat closet as guests were leaving. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something you can't name. I know my mom's been hard on you, she said. I'm sorry. Her eyes had a question in them she wasn't ready to ask. I touched her arm. You have nothing to be sorry for, Paige. As I walked to the car, I looked back through the dining room window. Vivian was gripping Bryce's forearm, speaking rapidly, low. Bryce reached into his jacket and passed her a small flat box. Vivian slipped it into her clutch without breaking eye contact with him. I got in the car. Did you see what your uncle just gave your mother? I asked Ethan. He hadn't. The night before the wedding, Rachel stayed at our apartment while Ethan went to his groomsman's house. Tradition, the real kind. Not Vivian's kind. We sat on the living room floor with takeout containers and a laptop open to the final version of the forensic report. Rachel had already loaded the demand letter into her firm's certified mail queue, timed for Monday at 8 a.m. A copy of the full report was addressed to Harold Fenn at his Greenville office. Same delivery time. Everything's set, Rachel said, closing the laptop. Monday morning, the letter hits Vivian's mailbox. Harold gets the report simultaneously. By Wednesday, he'll have enough to petition the probate court for trustee substitution. I nodded. The plan was methodical, professional, the way I handle every case. Paperwork first, emotions later. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Rachel asked about the wedding. No. About what comes after? A little. You could still wait. Let the legal process handle everything. You don't have to be in the room when it happens. I know. I looked at my wedding dress hanging on the back of the bedroom door. Ivory lace, simple cut. I'd bought it at a consignment shop in Colia for $200. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. My dad would have walked me down that aisle, I said. The words just came out. Rachel didn't try to fill them. She just sat with me in the quiet. He would have liked Ethan, I continued, and he would have hated what Vivian did with that trust. I went to bed at 11. Before I turned off the lamp, I checked my phone one last time. No messages from Vivian. No messages from Bryce. The silence felt deliberate, like a held breath before a plunge. Saturday, wedding day. I woke at 6 to the sound of cardinals outside the bedroom window. South Carolina, in late spring. The air was already thick and sweet, jasmine pushing through the screen. Rachel was in the kitchen making coffee. She handed me a mug without a word, the way people do when they know you don't need conversation. You need caffeine. My mother arrived at 8. Janine Porter, 5 feet 2 inches, arms ropey from decades of orchard work and cleaning houses, wearing a lavender dress she'd bought at the Bell in Orangeburg because they had a Senior Tuesday discount. She carried a small velvet pouch. Your daddy gave me this the day he proposed, she said, pulling out a silver hair clip with a single pearl at the center, tarnished, dented at one corner where it had fallen off a nightstand 20 years ago. You carry it today. She pinned it into my hair while Rachel zipped the dress, and I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself. Forensic accountant, peach farmer's daughter, bride. I looked like a woman about to walk into the most important audit of her life. Rachel's phone buzzed. A text from Harold Fenn. Receive the materials. Will review first thing Monday. Appreciated. One piece. The legal infrastructure was locked. Whatever happened today, the numbers would start moving through the system in 48 hours. We drove to the Callaway estate at 10. The property looked its best. Someone had repainted the gate, trimmed the boxwoods, strung white lights through the magnolia. Vivian met us in the foyer. She wore champagne silk and a smile wide enough to hide anything. You look beautiful, Morgan, she said and kissed my cheek. Today is going to be unforgettable. I smiled back. I'm sure it will be. The ceremony was in the garden. White chairs in rows on either side of a stone path that led to a wooden arch. Robert had built years ago for the company's 30th anniversary party. 150 guests, late afternoon sun falling in slanted gold through the pecan trees. I walked down the aisle with my mother on one side and an empty space on the other. Nobody asked about the empty space. Anyone who knew our family understood it belonged to Dale Porter, and his absence was louder than any music. Ethan waited at the arch in a charcoal suit. His eyes were red before I reached him, not from crying, but from the effort of not crying. We'd written our own vows. His were short. I promised to build something real with you every day, the way my dad taught me. Mine were shorter. I promised to protect what we build. Every piece of it. The officiant pronounced us married. The crowd stood. Someone's grandmother shouted, "About time!" and the whole garden laughed. Vivian sat in the front row with a lace handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Her shoulders shook with what looked like emotion. Bryce sat beside her perfectly still, his eyes on me, not moved, measuring. After the ceremony, cocktail hour flowed into the garden, past appetizers, a bourbon bar, the string quartet playing something by Bach that sounded like structured patience. I mingled, shook hands, accepted congratulations. All the while, I kept one eye on the ballroom entrance. At 4:47, Vivian excused herself from a conversation with the caterer and walked through the double doors into the ballroom alone. The cocktail crowd was thick enough that nobody noticed, but I noticed because noticing is what I do. I waited 90 seconds, then I handed my champagne flute to Rachel. She was standing near the garden hedge, watching the same door I was watching, and walked into the ballroom through the side entrance, the staff corridor that connected to the kitchen. The room was set for dinner, round tables with ivory linens, tall centerpieces of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus, votives flickering in the air conditioning, and at the head table, positioned dead center, 2 champagne flutes on crystal coasters, one at Ethan's seat, one at mine. Vivian was at the far end of the head table. Her back was to me. Her left hand adjusted the orchid arrangement, while her right hand held a small amber vial. Pharmacy-grade glass. No label visible from this distance. She tilted it over the rim of my glass. A tap on the bottom. 2 shakes. She recapped it, slipped it into her clutch, smoothed the tablecloth with both palms, and walked out through the main doors without looking back. She hadn't seen me. I'd been standing behind a pillar near the kitchen passed through, watching her reflection in the large decorative mirror mounted on the opposite wall. 5 seconds after Vivian cleared the doors, I walked to the head table, 2 glasses, mine, now containing whatever was in that vial. Hers clean. I picked up both flutes by the stems, switched their positions, set them on their respective coasters, adjusted both place cards to match. The whole operation took less than 8 seconds. I stepped back and looked at the table. Everything in order. Vivian's glass with her own sedative now sat at her place setting. My glass clean sat at mine. My hands didn't shake. Numbers don't shake. And tonight, the numbers were about to balance. The reception began at 5:30. Guests filed into the ballroom, found their table cards, settled into the murmur of conversation and clinking glass that fills a room before the first toast. Vivian and Bryce sat at the head table, flanking the 2 empty chairs reserved for Ethan and me. I watched Vivian's posture as we took our seats. She was relaxed, shoulders back, chin lifted, the posture of a woman who believed she'd already won. Ethan pulled my chair out. I sat. My champagne glass was directly in front of me, clean and full of nothing but wine. Vivian's glass was in front of her, full of champagne and her own prescription sedative. The string quartet stopped. Vivian stood and a coordinator handed her a wireless microphone. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, and the room obeyed. Her speech was polished. She spoke about Robert with practiced tenderness. She spoke about Ethan with a mother's pride that sounded earned even though I knew the cost of it. She spoke about the Callaway name, the legacy, the importance of family. Then she turned to me. "Morgan, I've watched you closely these past months." She paused. The room was still. "You're precise, thorough, and today I want you to know something." She raised her glass, the glass with her own sedative. "You'll never forget this day." 150 glasses went up. Vivian drank deep, confident. I raised my glass, met her eyes across the table, and smiled. Drank clean champagne. Nothing but bubbles and grapes. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. He didn't know about the glass yet. I'd tell him tonight along with everything else. But he felt the tension in my fingers and held on. The clock in the ballroom read 5:42. In roughly 30 minutes, the champagne and the benzodiazepine would finish their conversation in Vivian's bloodstream. And everyone in this room was going to see exactly what that looked like. Dinner was served at 6. Pan-seared salmon, roasted asparagus, fingerling potatoes, Vivian's caterer, Vivian's menu, Vivian's china. Guests ate and talked. The string quartet shifted to something softer. I made conversation with Ethan's aunt on my left, a retired schoolteacher from Spartanburg, who told me 3 stories about Ethan as a toddler and laughed at all of them herself. Normal, warm, the way a wedding should feel. At 6:12, I noticed the first sign. Vivian laughed at something Bryce said, but the laugh was louder than it should have been. A beat too long, a pitch too high. She gestured with her fork and nearly knocked over her water glass. At 6:18, she was telling a story to the couple beside her, and her words started running into each other like cars in a parking lot. Not slurring yet, just softening, losing their edges. At 6:24, Bryce leaned toward her and said something low. Vivian waved him off. "I'm fine, Bryce. I'm perfectly fine." But her hand missed the table when she tried to set down her glass, and champagne sloshed over the rim onto the linen. Paige, sitting 2 seats down, looked at her mother with a furrowed brow. "Mom, maybe you should slow down on the champagne." Vivian blinked at Paige as if trying to focus. "I've had 1 glass, Paige." One, she had. That was the problem. 1 glass with approximately 3 milligrams of her own benzoazepine dissolved in it. Combined with the alcohol, it was producing exactly what she'd intended for me. Impaired coordination, slowed speech, visible disorientation. The elegant matriarch of the Callaway family was starting to look like she'd pre-gamed the reception. The guests closest to the head table had started trading glances. Ethan looked at me. "Something's wrong with Mom." I held his hand. "I know. I'll explain everything soon." At 6:37, Vivian tried to stand. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands, pushed herself up, and immediately listed to the right, like a boat taking water. A groomsman seated nearby reached out and steadied her arm. "Mrs. Callaway, are you all right?" She pulled away from him. "Something's wrong with this champagne," she said loudly enough for the nearest 4 tables to hear. Someone did something to my drink." The murmur in the room changed pitch, heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence. Vivian's eyes swept the room and landed on me. "She did something," Vivian said, pointing. Her finger wavered. "The girl Morgan." Bryce was on his feet, one hand on Vivian's shoulder. "Viv, sit down. You're not well. Don't touch me." She shrugged him off hard enough that he stumbled back a step. "She put something in my glass." I know she did. 150 people were now looking at me. I sat down my napkin, stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, kept my voice low and level. The same voice I use when presenting findings to a boardroom. "Vivian, the only thing in your glass tonight is exactly what you put in it yourself." The room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents. Vivian's face lost its color. "You're lying. I saw you through the mirror above the flower arrangement. You poured from a small amber bottle into my glass while everyone was outside for cocktails, so I switched our glasses before you came back." I let the words settle. "The venue has 2 security cameras in this room, Vivian. One of them is pointed directly at the head table." Bryce's jaw clenched. Vivian's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no script to follow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. 150 people leaning forward in their chairs creates its own amplifier. But the glass isn't why I'm standing here. I looked at Vivian the way I look at a balance sheet when the numbers don't add up. Not with anger, but with the calm precision of someone who knows exactly where the discrepancy lives. 5 years ago, Robert Callaway established a family trust, $650,000, split equally between his 2 children, Ethan and Paige, to be distributed when each of them turned 30th. Vivian's hand gripped the table edge. "That is private family. Ethan turned 30 3 years ago. He's received nothing." I continued in the same, even tone. "Over the past 3 years, Vivian used trust funds as operating capital for Callaway Construction, then moved approximately $540,000 through a shell company called Piedmont Property Solutions, registered to Bryce Howard via inflated property transactions. The proceeds were split between Bryce's brokerage commission and consulting fees, paid back to Vivian." I paused, breathed. "Every dollar has an owner, Vivian. These belong to your children." Paige's voice came from 2 chairs away, small and cracked. "What?" She was looking at her mother with an expression. I recognized the expression of someone watching a foundation give way beneath the house they grew up in. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I reached under my chair for the envelope I'd placed there before the ceremony, walked it to Paige. This is a copy of your father's trust agreement. He left a letter with it. You should read it." Paige took the envelope with both hands. Her fingers were trembling. She pulled out Robert's handwritten note and read it in the silence of a room where no one dared to breathe. Bryce made his move. He pushed back from the table, buttoned his blazer with mechanical precision, and walked toward the ballroom exit as if leaving a meeting that had run long. Rachel stepped out from the doorway, where she'd been standing since the toast. She was wearing her sneakers. She always wore her sneakers to the fights that mattered. "Mr. Howard," her voice carried the practiced neutrality of a courtroom. "A formal complaint regarding your real estate license was filed with the South Carolina Real Estate Commission this morning, along with a referral to the State Attorney General's office. I'd advise you to retain counsel." Bryce stopped walking. He didn't turn around. He just stopped, like a machine that had lost power mid-stride. His shoulders dropped an inch. Then he walked to the far wall and stood there with his back to the room, staring at nothing. Vivian was still at the table, one hand flat on the linen for balance. The sedative had her fully now. Her speech came in fragments. Her eyes struggled to focus, and her composure had dissolved into something raw and desperate. She turned to Ethan. "Ethan, honey, I did it for the company. Your father left us with nothing. The business was drowning. I had to save it." Ethan's voice was quiet, but steady. "You had to save it with our money. With money Dad set aside for me and Paige. You don't understand what it was like." "I understand perfectly." His jaw tightened. "You took Dad's money. You lied about it for 5 years. And tonight, you tried to drug my wife." Vivian reached toward Paige, her hand extended across the table, fingers trembling. Not from the sedative now, but from something older and more human than chemistry. Paige looked at her mother's hand, looked at the letter in her own. She stood up slowly and stepped backward. 1 step. She didn't say a word. Neither did Vivian. The space between the mother's outstretched hand and the daughter's retreating step was the saddest thing in that room. And the room was full of sad things. I looked across the ballroom. 150 faces, most of them strangers to me until a few months ago. At the corner table, my mother sat with her hands folded in her lap, her lavender belt dress slightly wrinkled at the hem. She wasn't crying. She was watching me the way she used to watch me climb the peach ladder as a kid. Not scared for me, just ready. I spoke to the room, but quietly. If people wanted to hear, they'd have to lean in. I didn't plan for this to happen at our wedding. The legal process was set to begin Monday morning. Certified letters, court petitions, the proper channels. I paused. But when someone pours something into your glass on the day you're supposed to trust them with your family, you don't wait until Monday. No one moved. "This is still our day," I said, and turned to Ethan. He was standing beside me now, his hand on the small of my back. "We're still married. We're still standing. And from today forward, we build on a foundation that's actually solid." Ethan faced the room. His voice had the roughness of a man who just watched his world rearrange itself, but it was firm. "Dinner is still being served. The band is still playing. If you'd like to stay and celebrate with us, we'd love that." A beat of silence. Then my mother stood up. Then Ethan's aunt from Spartanburg. Then the construction foreman at table 9, all 4 of them at once pushing their chairs back and clapping. Within 10 seconds, half the room was on its feet. Vivian was helped to the door by Bryce, who'd returned to the table only to retrieve her clutch. They walked out together, leaning on each other like 2 buildings with shared walls that had both started to crack. Nobody followed them. Nobody needed to. Monday morning, Rachel sent the demand letter. Certified mail, return receipt, requested. Vivian had 30 days to provide a full accounting of the trust and propose a plan for restitution. The same morning, Harold Fenn received the complete forensic report at his Greenville office. He called Rachel by noon. "I've reviewed the materials," he said. "I'll be filing a petition with the probate court by end of week to have Mrs. Callaway removed as trustee." 2 months later, the court appointed an independent trustee, a retired trust officer from a Spartanburg bank who had no connection to the Callaway family. Vivian was ordered to restore the misappropriated funds, $541,800. She sold the Callaway estate, the house, the land, the garden where we'd been married to a developer who planned to subdivide it into half-acre lots. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her husband had built the company that built houses. Now his house was being demolished to build more. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment off Point Poinsett Highway in Greenville. Bryce had his real estate license revoked by the South Carolina Real Estate Commission. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation into the shell company transactions. He stopped answering his phone. Paige's share of the trust remained intact, protected by the new trustee, and held for her until she turns 30. She read Robert's letter 4 more times that first month. She told me later that the sentence she kept returning to was the simplest one. It's not much, but it's theirs. Ethan and I talked about whether to pursue criminal charges. We decided not to. The civil process was enough. Vivian would lose everything she'd built on stolen ground, but she wouldn't lose her freedom. That wasn't mercy. It was proportion. The same principle that governs every balanced ledger I've ever reviewed. 6 months later, we invited Vivian to dinner. Our house, a 3-bedroom bungalow on Poinsett Street that Ethan and I bought with our own savings. No trust money, no Callaway equity. She arrived in a gray cardigan and flat shoes. No pearls, no silk blouse. She looked smaller. The way people do in the architecture they've built around themselves gets taken down. We ate roasted chicken and green beans. Nobody talked about trusts or shell companies or amber vials. When the plates were cleared, I spoke. You're Ethan's mother. That doesn't change, but the lying stops. The control stops. If you want to be in our lives, you show up as you are, not as who you pretend to be. Vivian looked at her coffee cup for a long time. I don't know how to do that, she said. Then learn. We'll be here while you do. She nodded. Before she left, she stood at the front door with her coat over her arm. She looked at me, then at Ethan, and said quietly, "Welcome to the family. For real this time." The words were the same ones she'd said at the engagement, but they sounded completely different coming from a woman who had nothing left to protect except the truth. Vivian told me I'd never forget my wedding day. She was right. But not because of the glass. I remember my mother's hand on my elbow walking me down the aisle. I remember Ethan's voice when he chose the truth over comfort. I remember standing in a room full of people, steady and certain, knowing that the numbers and the woman behind them don't lie. So that's what happens when a forensic accountant marries into a family that needed auditing. A switched glass, a trust document in a dusty box, a mother-in-law who learned that some daughters-in-law come with receipts. If someone in your life is hiding behind the word family to take what isn't theirs, speak up, like, share, and subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge for more stories. I'll see you in the next one.